All right, guys, our next guest needs very little introduction, but you know him as one of the best analysts in the sport with some of the best breakdowns on his channel, Full Reptile, a former UFC title challenger, and of course, the head of fighter operations in PFL Europe, here to help us preview the massive card this weekend. Dan Hardy, welcome back, man. How are you?
Really good, guys. Thank you for the kind introduction, as always.
Well, Dan, we appreciate it, man. We know you're always working on a bunch of stuff with the PFL and everything else, but I got to quickly, before we even get into UFC 294, man, got to get your reaction to what was a very strange evening or morning or whatever the time was, wherever it is where you watch the KSI, Tommy Fury, and of course the Dillon Danis, Logan Paul fights. A lot of weird reactions, a lot of people sort of saying that they felt a little bit ripped off, a little bit trolled, a little bit tricked into sort of tuning into it, a little bit stupid in watching it over some of the UFC fights. And I just want to sort of get your reaction to what seems to be one of those interesting fights where a lot of people for the first time, when it comes to this celebrity boxing stuff, a lot of people for the first time having a real negative reaction to what they witnessed or what went down.
Yeah, I mean, I think people are still battling with the genre in general, aren't they? Like the idea of YouTubers coming in and making loads and loads of money doing something that boxers have worked really hard for years to do and are still not making very much. Like there's a lot of struggle with that. There's a lot of struggle with like, should we be paying these guys this much attention? And like we all kind of feel like it's a bit of a money spin because they're all playing it up. And like honestly, like, up until this point, like I've been watching these events. Obviously, I was a part of the Jake Paul Nate Diaz one, and that felt like a fight. Like they felt like they were trying to hurt one another. That felt legitimate. Same as, of course, the Mayweather McGregor fight. That felt like of course the build up was good, and I feel like Mayweather could have maybe put his foot on the gas a bit more, but still, it felt. But then this event this week felt so much closer to pro wrestling than it did to anything actually combat sports. And I don't know, it kind of helped me make peace with the whole genre, because that's what these guys are about, aren't they? I mean, look, Tommy Fury has got decent boxing fundamentals, but if he carried on down the professional boxing route, like the chasing the titles and trying to be the number one in the world, he's probably going to get beaten before he gets into the top five, Like, I just don't know whether that's where his future is. I think it's smarter for him to go in the influencer route, and because that's where he's going to make money. I mean, he's a character. He can provoke. He plays off well against these guys. He's easy to provoke, which, and then of course you bring John Fury in there as well. I just feel like he's so much closer to pro wrestling that I don't really mind it anymore. You kind of get what you get when you tune in, and if you're watching it for fights, then you look in the wrong place.
Just quickly before we move on, Dillon Danis, got to get your thoughts on him, because in a lot of ways, this guy's a bit of a genius, because he was able to get a lot of people to tune into this fight. He's not exactly a boxer. And if you look at the numbers that he's been doing leading into the fight, when it comes to interviews and stuff like that, he seemingly has been able to capture a lot of people's attention. But, at the same time, a lot of people are like, he trolled us. We don't know. So where does he sit in your mind in terms of what he's been able to achieve and kind of where he is now?
I mean, what he's been able to achieve, I'm not really sure. Like he's not really achieved a great deal. I mean, I would imagine he's made a bunch of cash, but I don't know what he sacrificed to make that money. Like he's that person every day. People know he's not really playing a character. He is that person, and I feel like that runs out very quickly. It's like the boy who cried wolf. You can only kind of pretend you're going to get into a real fight a few times before people start to check out, and I think if he keeps kind of talking himself up, like it was just a mess, wasn't it, really? And I didn't expect a great deal more from him. I was partly hoping that Mike Perry was going to step in for Logan Paul at last minute and just berserker him, you know what I mean? Like I was because then you can't avoid being in a real fight. Whereas I kind of felt like Logan Paul, even though if he really wants to put it on Dillon Danis, he could have done, but he was going to play it. He was going to toy it out a little bit and make it more of a fight than it actually was. But I don't know, he's just kind of a mess. I feel a bit sorry for him. He seems to be so desperate for attention, but going in the wrong directions to do it.
There is a little bit of a sense of sorrow there, so I do agree. As HBK said once after wrestling Hulk Hogan, back to regular programming. We'll get Islam Makhachev versus Alex Volkanovski this
and
weekend.
the fans have lost their smile.
Well, they'll be in Abu Dhabi enjoying sunny days. So Islam Makhachev versus Alex Volkanovski, the big rematch that we've wanted, not under ideal circumstances. That's probably one of the caveats. But nevertheless, it's a bloody damn good fight, and we get it instead of Charles, which was also going to be a good fight. But just Volko stepping up with such short notice, Islam obviously accepting on such short notice. Who do you think the short notice benefits more, though? Because on one hand, you got Islam, who he's had the full camp, he's preparing for Charles. You got to assume that fitness and physically he's peaking. But then you got Volkanovski, he hasn't had the bumps and bruises of a full camp, and the cut should be relatively easy by comparison. He hasn't had that long, arduous mental journey of like thinking about it for weeks and weeks and arguably months. But then again, if Volko loses here, this will be the second time. You got to think the UFC probably never going to make that fight ever again, right? So this is his big, massive, massive chance. And, if Islam keeps winning at 155, what does that mean for Volko at 155? So who do you think this short notice and also the mental side of it benefits more in this situation, Dan?
Well, first of all, I don't know. I don't necessarily know as Volk loses a great deal, because especially with UFC fights, when it's in such a high profile situation, there's always the caveat that's remembered that it was taken on short notice, right? Even if he loses, people are always going to go, yeah, but he took that on a couple of weeks' notice, remember? So I don't think he's going to disqualify himself from being back in this position, if that makes sense. Of course, I would expect him to go back down to featherweight and be in the mix there for a couple of fights before they, reestablish this matchup again. But I mean, the pressure's off him, and I think that must be quite refreshing for him. I think maybe it's one of the reasons why he went up to face Makhachev in the first place, because when you've been the champion for a while, I would imagine that it's quite daunting to step in there every time, with that expectation that you're going to dominate. You have to, because you're the champ. And going up a weight class, I would imagine there's a little bit of a sigh of relief, and especially as you mentioned, he's not had a full training camp where he's been thinking about it and anxious and going over the last fight over and over again. He's probably been doing that, but in a far more casual way. But on the other hand, like if I'm Makhachev, I've been preparing for Charles Oliveira. I've been preparing for a handful. No matter where the fight goes, he's chaos on the feet. You don't really know what to expect. He's very confident with his striking, even though he's quite hittable. And then of course his grappling is tremendous. And you've got to imagine that he would have brought a different level of conditioning as well, and maybe a different level of output. So for me, Makhachev is going to be in probably the best condition that he's ever been in. And I think that looking at Volk, it's a much clearer fight to win for him here. It's it's far less threatening in certain ranges, especially if he can get Volk to the floor. Of course, Volk wasn't submitted, and that was very, very impressive. But he did have his back taken, and he was controlled on the floor for good portions of the fight. Like I've watched it back, and I've watched it back a few times actually, and I struggled to give Volk more than one round, if I'm honest. I think he had a good fifth round, but the other rounds that were close, I still feel like Makhachev did the better work. The knockdown in the first round, for example, even though it was a forearm, he went down on one knee. That's a concussive blow. So, like for me, I feel like Makhachev's going to be patient in this one and let Volk come to him and bring the pressure, especially because Volk's most likely going to put his foot on the gas because he might want to try and get it finished because he's you don't know how his conditioning is going to be. Also because he's taking it on short notice and he's not having a big cut like going down to featherweight. There's a lot of different ways that this can play out, and I'm not really exactly sure the state of mind of Volk coming into this. I don't know whether he's going to feel excited because he gets another opportunity and he finished on a good note in the last fight, whether he's got this perspective that I could have done so many things differently and I can put that right again this time around. And I don't know. I'm sure he's just mad excited, and I would imagine Makhachev's feeling very confident because Charles Oliveira is a very, very tough test, and he would have been preparing for a hell of a battle.
And just good to note as well that, Volko got that new contract with the UFC, and it's great to see a guy who really struggled to get into the UFC and then really worked to get to that title shot, now in a position where he's going to be earning that, big money. Congratulations to him and his team. And yeah, you're right, Dan. Like, he was super duper excited when he was talking about it. He kind of looked like a kid at Christmas. He couldn't get the smile off his face about the fact that he was going up there and fighting Islam. I mean, we remember that he had some momentum towards the end of the fight. He was on top, raining down with punches, and he built a bit of momentum towards the end of the fight. But I got to ask, man, like, who do you think is going to make the bigger adjustments from that first fight? Like, and also, what would you like to see more of from both guys?
I think Makhachev's already shown he's got all the tools that he needs for this fight. I think his patience and his counter punching, especially in the later rounds when he was a little bit more fatigued, I think he did really well allowing Volkanovski to come to him and pick him off, and I think that made his takedown attempts easier as well. Volkanovski is a handful if he's got space to move forward, but he kept running into the clinch in the last fight. Like, he got caught in the tie clinch a few times. If I'm Volkanovski, I want to be very careful moving forward in a straight line, stepping through. Sometimes he can be very effective with it if his opponent moves away. Like, if you think if he's in an orthodox stance and he's going to step through to southpaw throwing power punches, like, he's traveling and he's got momentum, which he can't necessarily control when he's moving with force. And if Makhachev doesn't move away, then he's going to either run into a clinch, run into a takedown, or run into a counter punch. I think it was the second round of the last fight. He was doing a really good job of stepping through and slipping off to the side and throwing a right hook to the body. That landed really well a couple of times against Makhachev, who's southpaw, and the inside low kick as well, even though it's kind of bone to bone and it can be a little uncomfortable for him. It was working really well to destabilize Makhachev's base. So I think they're two things that he can utilize really well. But it's all about volume for Volkanovski. Damage the lead leg and then show Makhachev that he's the faster of the two fighters by using his footwork to move in and out of range. That's an advantage that he has over almost everyone in his fights. And if he kind of allows Makhachev to dictate the pace of the fight, then he's going to be there for the counterpunch and the takedowns. But it'll be interesting to see what he's learned, because, like you said, he did end the last fight with good momentum. He landed a good shot. He did hurt Makhachev, and his takedown offense and scrambling was good, and that did fatigue him in that last round. So we'll see. I'm excited to see the adjustments.
That fatigue towards the end for Makhachev, how much do you think that had to do with, like, the rehydration process in Perth, where you get a lot less time to rehydrate? And obviously in Abu Dhabi, you're not going to have that. You're going to get the full amount of time, I think even slightly a little bit more, to rehydrate. Do you think we see a different Makhachev, maybe with more gas in the tank as a result? How much of a factor do you think that's going to be in Abu Dhabi?
Well, I would imagine that team has gone over that last training camp and performance and really pulled it apart. And I would imagine that they know that this is a more comfortable environment for them to make weight. It's more familiar. And I think that they'll also be far smarter with their energy management. There's no reason for Makhachev to start so as fast as he did in the last fight. Start a bit slower and allow Volkanovski to work a bit more and counterpunch him in the first round. If he closes distance too quickly, giving ground is one of the worst things to do, because he keeps moving forward punching. But what Makhachev was doing really well was standing his ground, grabbing a tie clinch and working knees to the head and body. And then, of course, he's always got level changes as well as a secondary option. And I think that, that can very easily deter Volkanovski from being overly aggressive. But overworking can be something that he's got in his mind for this fight. Don't overwork. Pace yourself over 25 minutes, because maybe he anticipated putting Volkanovski away quicker than of course the fight played out. So he might now have a different perspective of what Volkanovski brings as a challenge, and he might have a better energy management because of that as well. I expect like I said, I think we're going to see the best version of Makhachev, which is a daunting task for Volkanovski. But then these wild card situations where, he steps in short notice and steals the day, like who knows what's going to happen. But it is a very, very tough test. It's almost Bisping stepping in and knocking rock isn't it? In the magnitude of it.
It's crazy. Like you mentioned it before. It's kind of like it's kind of crazy because like Islam's taking this fight on short notice, not something we usually see a lot of UFC champions agree to, right? Like completely different fight. And then Alex flying all the way over there last minute as well, not something we usually see a lot of people do, take the big chances. So I feel like a lot of people are super pumped about just the fact that this fight is happening, and we haven't really had a chance to really sit down and properly like process what does this actually mean for the division, for MMA, for everyone. But like if Alex is able to take this on 10 days notice, go in there, beat Islam, take this belt. What does this mean to you for his legacy? Like a lot of people talk about MMA greats, MMA goats, the Mount Rushmore of MMA. Like what does this do for that, to him, for that, if he's able to pull this one off?
I mean, it would be incredible. I mean, it would be. He's already in my eyes one of the best of all time to do it. He's what he's been able to achieve, and the way he's done it as well. I mean, his technical ability and his adaptability, his conditioning, his enthusiasm, his willing to compete. He's up there with the Frankie Edgars and the Demetrius Johnsons and the Jose Aldos for what they've contributed to the sport. To get a belt in a different division would be incredible. And I mean, what more could you ask for? Like, imagine, of course, it would be an immediate rematch. So if he was able to beat Makhachev a second time, that would be almost unthinkable. And then you're looking at maybe a Charles Oliveira fight, which, I mean, like we're daydreaming now, but there's still a lot more that Volkanovski can do, which is exciting. I just hope he kind of, I like these short notice opportunities, but I don't want him to burn himself out. I think that's what we've seen a little bit with Izzy. Like he kind of pushed a bit too much and he took too many opportunities because he was excited. And, there comes a time when you need to just kind of sit back and appreciate what you've achieved so far and then figure out, what key achievements you want to do before the career's over.
It's a really good point that you bring up. Actually, I was going to ask you a little bit afterwards, after we speak about Khamzat and Usman, but what do you think about Israel taking a little bit, well, I wouldn't say a little bit of time off. It's a little bit unclear of how long he'll be away for, but he said that he's not going to be fighting for a long time. And it seems like he's going to be focusing on his health, which sounds like a thing that makes a lot of sense. It's not exactly crazy, but it's obviously a departure from what he's been doing, which is just fighting so often and having the schedule that no one can really compare with. Were you sort of happy to see they're like, okay, cool, here's a guy who's already done the work, done the hard yards, and now maybe it's time to think about himself a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We can't keep squeezing the same lemon. You know what I mean? Eventually, it's going to run out of juice. And like Adesanya, for me, he was getting to that stage where he'd been in so many high-profile, high-pressure situations. He's had fights that weren't particularly easy as well. I mean, some of the fights were a real slog. The Blachowicz fight, the Gastelum fight. You've got to imagine how exhausting that is for him, as well as the attention every day, no matter where he goes. Carrying those pearls around as well, that looks exhausting. They look heavy. Like, I just imagine that he wouldn't eventually get to a stage, same as I was just saying with Volkanovski, where you just kind of need to stop for a moment and think to yourself, right, how many fights has he got left in his career? Like, even say if it's 10, like, he wants to be selecting those fights very carefully because they're going to A, be worth a lot of money, and B, be very, very high profile and potentially dangerous. And I think that's the smart thing to do now. You can't stay on that hamster wheel at this level. It must be exhausting. I was there for a very, very short amount of time, and honestly, I can't imagine sustaining it for any amount of months or years. And Izzy's been there for a long, long time now.
Yeah, no, what he does is incredible. For example, people don't realize for the Sean Strickland fight, he basically carried that whole event on his back and promoted it. And then he flew over, did the whole Dricus thing. He tries to build up a lot of events himself and does a lot of the promotion for these cards. And people don't realize it's kind of like when you put these cards on your back, because, he is such a big star and everybody wants to see a lot from him, that must be super duper tiring on top of the fighting and stuff. And, me and Casper have seen him actually in the real world just walking down the street. And it's like, he can't go anywhere. Like, people stop him everywhere he goes. Everyone wants a photo. He's super nice to everyone. So that must just be, just from an emotional standpoint and just the standpoint of having to sort of take care of so much in these situations, especially in Sydney with this Strickland fight, and really sort of having to sell people on tuning in and promoting it and making it happen. Man, I couldn't imagine how tiring that must be on top of the fighting. Just quickly, before we go to Khamzat versus Usman, because that's going to be the next person that looks like that's going to fight for the title. I'm getting a feeling you're sort of leaning towards Islam winning here against Alex, but I'm curious, like when you think about how Islam gets it done, are you actually picturing a finish here, or do you think this thing goes the whole 5 rounds?
No, I could see him. I could see him remedying a conclusion in this one. If I'm honest, I can see Volk giving a really good effort for maybe 2 or 3 rounds, but eventually Islam, consciously energy expenditure. I just think he's going to pressure and he's going to be steady with it, and he's going to wear Volkanovski down. And I think he could potentially ground and pound him out from the back, from a flattened out rear naked choke position, or just finish with the rear naked choke this time around. There'll be corrections that he's made in all of those positions, because even though he came out with the win, he won't be happy with his performance, and he'll have made some adjustments as well, even if it's just mentally, not preparing for this fight. It's going to be a tough fight for Alex, but big respect for taking it, and I'm always up for a surprise.
If he is able to get it done here, it seems like it's kind of like the end of a chapter. He's finished up the big question at lightweight. Is this the last time we see Islam fight at lightweight? Does he move up to welterweight next, if you had to predict it?
No, I don't know. I think we might see him at lightweight a little more. I wouldn't surprise me if he moves up to fight at welterweight, without relinquishing the lightweight title. I think he's going to keep that door open, even if they create an interim and someone else is fighting ready for him to come back. I mean, you just never know what's going to happen with McGregor, right? Like that's a fight that would sell over and over. Is if Islam goes up to welterweight, wins a fight up there against a top contender, and then comes back down to lightweight because McGregor's won a fight against Chandler, and that's how the cards have fallen. It wouldn't surprise me at all. But I think it's going to be that kind of fight that would get him back down to lightweight.
Yeah, that's right, man. Well, nothing like shaving off a couple of pounds to fight the division's best guys like, Oliveira down the line, Justin Gaethje, maybe even Beneil Dariush, all sorts of great fights still there at 155. And that's why I'm excited for this fight as well, because there's a lot of stakes here and sort of, want to find out what exactly all of this leads to for both Islam and Volkanovski as well. Speaking of shaving things off, our good friends at Manscaped have got you covered this Halloween. I know it's Halloween, I know it's spooky season, but you don't want to be scaring people with a scary set of neck beard hairs. Nobody likes that. Let Manscaped help you with the Handyman Face Razor. If you're tired of a bad razor making your neck look like a scary movie, the Handyman Skin Safe technology will help you reduce nicks and cuts. You can finally feel confident when going in for that close shave. For years, I personally have not shaved the neck beard properly. I've just used a beard trimmer, but that's not the right way to do it. I also avoided traditional razors because those always give me ingrown hairs. The Handyman fixes all of that for wet or dry use. Feel free to bring this anywhere, everywhere. The compact design and aeroplane friendliness make this the perfect travel tool for on the go, and being able to shave up to 3 days growth without the mess of a wet shave is absolutely priceless. And for any of the Wolfmen listening with a little bit more scruff, Manscaped's Beard Hedger Pro Kit has everything you need to tame your mane. The cordless trimmer with the rotary wheel, we've spoken about that. 20 hair cutting lengths, all with one guard, so no more drawers full of extra add-ons and, nonsense collecting cobwebs. So get yourself the Beard Hedger and the Handyman with a cheeky 20% off with the code submission. Isn't that right, Dennis?
That's right, man. The thing with the neck beards is they go out so quickly, and you're going into a meeting, you're like, damn, man, I look silly right now. What do I do? What do I go? What can I do? This Handyman is absolutely essential in making sure you look sharp no matter what happens. If you want to keep that face looking smooth and sexy, 20% off with the code word submission and free shipping now, like Casper said. It's an essential product to get you to where you want to go. A big thanks to Manscaped for sorting all the boys out, all the gents out, all over the world every time. Isn't that right, Cass?
100%. Also, UFC 294 Fight Week is here, baby. Finally, the long-awaited, recently changed, arguably maybe even better pay-per-views around the corner, and everybody's obviously looking for the perfect venue to watch the fights, watch them for free, enjoy maybe a cheeky pub meal, grab a few pints with the boys or the missus, and our good friends at Fanzo have got you covered with the world's best and free venue finder. All you do, download the app, completely free. Chuck in Makhachev vs Volkanovski 2. I've got it here on my phone right now. It'll show you all the venues nearby to you. Let's have a look. The Royal Derby Hotel, if you were to check this one out and use this venue. 12 screens, commentary, serves food, Wi-Fi, garden, pet-friendly, outdoor screen. All you need to know, you can check out whatever venue suits you, whatever you're looking for. It's good to know things like commentary, some pubs, some venues. It's the worst when you go in there. They got the fights playing and then like the cricket commentary is playing through the speakers. Nothing worse. Fanzo helps you be prepared and avoid things like that. Also, it's going to be 5 a.m. here in Australia. So, of course, you want to know what's open at that time because you no doubt will be out from the night before. And then also for anyone else around the world, which can also use Fanzo, you'll want to know where to go to watch this live and loud. Isn't that right, Dennis?
That's right, man. I wonder if there'll be a few replays playing across Australia, maybe a little bit later in the day. But I will say that this Danis poll thing, these niche events that you can't really find at a lot of bars, Fanzo is absolutely perfect for sorting out which venues play the sports that you want to watch. It's the ultimate venue finder. Click the link in the description below. It really does make a big difference when you bring the boys up to a venue that's quality and you don't have to hear shit about it for the rest of your life. Use Fanzo today, Cass.
That's right. But Dan, just going back to UFC 294, obviously we've got Usman and Chimaev fighting on the co-main event. I'm super, super excited, but I just want to take a second to soak in this crazy set of circumstances where, again, Paulo Costa unfortunately hasn't been able to make it to another fight. And then you've got Usman whose future seemed a little bit up in the air, and it seemed like he was a lot closer to retirement than anything else. And now he's taking this fight on almost no notice, and he's gone from being somewhat close to retirement to being on the cusp of potentially being a 2-divisional champ. Crazy, right?
Yeah, I mean, a wild set of circumstances, and kind of different in the short notice situation. From the main event. Like, I feel like if I'm Chimaev, this feels like a bigger challenge. I feel like there are a lot more problems that Usman can present than Paulo Costa would have done. Not that Paulo Costa wouldn't be an absolute handful, because he would, but if I'm Chimaev, I'm thinking to myself, I can wear him down, I can make him tired, and I can expose him to a submission of some sort. Whereas with Usman, you don't know whether the wrestling is going to completely cancel out. Like, we might just see these two guys stand and trade. We might not see Chimaev try and wrestle Usman at all. This might be a boxing match, and then it's a coin toss. I mean, they've both got really, really good basic boxing fundamentals, good straight punching, nice, clean, in and out of range, bat, just like we saw with Usman against Masvidal. You can imagine that right hand landing, or exactly what Chimaev did to Meerschaert, where he just corkscrewed him into the fence and pinged him on the chin. They're both terrifying individuals, but I do kind of feel like this has changed the approach for Chimaev. I think wrestling was much more on the agenda for Paulo Costa, and now I feel that may have changed with Kamaru Usman stepping in.
What do you think about Usman's wrestling at this point, and how curious are you to see it? Just because, like, he had some of the most dominant wrestling the welterweight division has ever seen, right? But lately, not only has he been focusing more on his striking, and I think a lot of that is just because, it's a huge part of his game that he's been working really, really hard to evolve. And so, of course, he wants to show that, be multidimensional. But then there's also the observations that it seems like he's been having trouble with his knees for the longest time. He's getting a little bit older. Where do you think Usman's wrestling, really is at this point? That's the big factor that I'm looking at as far as where Chimaev, may even be able to get a bit of a leg up, so to speak, because Usman's wrestling just might not be what it used to be.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point, but I also wonder whether his not using his wrestling in his fights was much more about more of a conscious decision. I mean, using Justin Gaethje as an example, he was someone that had a strong wrestling skill set coming into mixed martial arts and heavy hands that complemented it very well. But I think most wrestlers realize that, I mean, wrestling's exhausting, winning or losing. If you're winning at wrestling, you're still exhausted. It's much easier to punch somebody on the chin and knock them out cold with one shot. It's much more energy efficient. And I think that Usman, realized how fast and powerful he could be. He went to a great coach in Trevor Whitman, who was able to give him those boxing fundamentals that complemented his speed and his power. Like it's just a more efficient way of fighting, and I think that's a big part of Usman's decision making. Your body can't keep going with the wrestling, the wear and tear. You will get exhausted. Shoulders and knees, as you say, wear out. Like maybe Chimaev's going to come in with full of wrestling enthusiasm and think that he's going to try and prove a point with Usman. But I also think at least in the first round, Usman's going to be a difficult individual to take down and hold down. Like, even if that just lasts 5 minutes, that might be enough to really slow Chimaev down and discourage him. Like when he started to slow down in the Gilbert Burns fight, like you take Kamaru Usman and put him in that second round against Chimaev after the first round against Gilbert Burns, and that might be a different fight because Usman has got 25 minutes conditioning and good pacing, and I feel like even if he expends hard a 5-minute round defending takedowns against Chimaev, gets himself into the second, that might take a real toll on Chimaev. But one other thing I will add, because I'm rattling on, I think this is a different fight as well because it's a middleweight, right?
Yeah.
You've got to think that Kamaru Usman, he probably paced himself very well, much like Aldo did at featherweight, because he knew that his gas tank was going to be finite, especially with the kind of weight cuts that he was doing. I mean, you're looking at a 200-pound plus fighter that's going down 30 pounds to make 170. I think him at 185, he's still going to be cutting weight. He might not be coming in quite as big as Chimaev, but he's got a reach advantage of an inch, I think. He gives up height, but I don't think that makes a difference in this fight to him. So I think physiologically Usman's going to feel much better at this weight class, and I don't think we'll see him down at welterweight if he gets a win here.
I'm excited about this, man, because I really think this could be sort of like a second coming for Usman. I really want to see what he looks like at middleweight. And, of course, we know like Khamzat, who knows what he's really like at welterweight towards the end of that with those massive weight cuts. So I want to see him at his 100%. But I just can't believe we're seeing this fight, man, because this is the fight at welterweight now happening at middleweight for the title. Who do you to fight for the title? Whoever wins, who do you think is going to win this one? Like, what's your prediction?
You know what? I have like a natural feeling towards the main event, but with the co-main event, I'm not really sure. I keep swaying back and forth. I can see Chimaev coming out and grabbing a hold of Usman around the body and just kind of ragdolling him until he puts him in a bad position. But I can also see him, like with the Kevin Holland fight, he was chasing that Darce choke for a while, and I can see him exhausting himself trying to do the same thing against Usman. If he comes in with that kind of impatience, which wouldn't surprise me. I mean, he's undefeated. It's his 13th fight. He's got that excitement that he can finish the majority of people in the first round, and he might just come out guns blazing. But if he does, I think he's going to struggle with Usman. It won't surprise me if we see Usman lose the first round and win the second and third and take a decision. I don't know. I'm kind of swaying back and forth, honestly. I think Chimaev is a freight train, but I think he's got to pace himself in this fight. Otherwise, he's going to show his lack of experience against a welterweight champion.
I think you're right in the sense that there's so many unknowns in terms of like, you can break down the skills on paper, but then it just comes down to like on the night, what does Chimaev feel like doing, really? He just seems like that kind of guy who would just call an audible. And then Usman, obviously, like we've just never seen him fight at 185, so there's a lot of unknowns there. His age, his body, his health, things like that. Just last thing I wanted to get your thoughts on, and it's just like, dude, I'm so excited about one of these guys potentially getting the next title shot. At the same time, you've got Dricus, who clearly, if we're talking meritocracy, has earned it. Beating Robert Whittaker the way that he did it, there should be no argument that he at least deserves the next title shot. What do you think of the fact that one of these guys will be getting the next title shot? And it like on a little detour, that's going to be crazy to see, because it seems like Khamzat had his way with Sean Strickland, in those sparring sessions. And then obviously Usman's already beaten Strickland, but that was at a different weight class, arguably a different Sean Strickland. But what do you think about Dricus sort of getting passed over here?
I mean, I would imagine that for him, it would be frustrating, but the story was with him and Adesanya. So Adesanya stepping away does kind of it does kind of bring an end to that narrative. And you know, this is ultimately like what that's the UFC is about. Like, where's the narrative? What sells the most, and who is the most interested? And if they can position it legitimately, then it makes sense. And I think that's what this fight is. You can make the argument because people want to see it, you know, and ultimately that's what's going to win the day. It makes it easier with it being Usman because, you know, he being a former champion at welterweight, you know, I think it's an easier transition for him to step straight into a high level fight in this weight class. But then I also think that it's a qualifying fight for Chimaev if he gets a win over Usman, even though it's a different weight class. I think it holds this, you know, a similar kind of regard. It's a part of the sport, unfortunately. There's not always, you know, it's not always going to be a meritocracy. And I do think that Dricus will get his opportunity, but I think the dynamic between Sean Strickland and Chimaev's interesting, because that video where he was saying, you know, like we all know you better than us or something, like. That's a very interesting mindset, because I don't think that Sean Strickland would maintain it if they actually fought. Like, he's a fight night fighter. Like, if you actually fight Sean Strickland and he's got 25 minutes to beat you up, he's gonna be a real handful. So I wouldn't be against seeing that fight, if I'm honest. But I'm open to all of them because they're all good fighters, and I'm excited to see someone try and solve the problem that is Sean Strickland.
Yeah, well, we saw it in Sydney, right? He went in against a guy who many people thought he would lose against, and there you go. Was able to pull off that performance and show people that he's very different in that octagon than maybe what people perceive he is. Before we finish up, man, I got to double check with you. What's the latest on PFL Europe? Like, what's something that people can look forward to? I know you're always busy working. And also, what's the latest with your return to action? I feel like we always sort of mention it, but always excited to see if there's any updates there as well.
Man, I feel like we mention it every time, but no, it's everything's gone quiet again. Look, I know PFL are working on this pay-per-view event, and like, I've had a couple of conversations about a couple of different fighters on the roster that might be options, or, you know, I don't know. I'm open to it. My focus right now is, well, first of all, Veronica, she's fighting in December 2nd in Texas, so we're getting ready for that one at the moment. And the Dublin card. I mean, we've got the championships coming up Black Friday, but the Dublin card is coming together. We've got some good fighters on it. You know, we've made a couple of really good signings recently, which we'll be announcing in the coming few days. Potential superstars for the future. And now I'm working on 2024's roster as well. I'm going to be announcing the weight classes soon. I'm switching up one of the weight classes from this year to next year. A little bit of bias maybe, but it's a solid weight class for Europe, and I think we're going to get some lightning fights after the championships this year in Dublin, which is going to be amazing. Next year is going to be a very, very strong year for PFL Europe and global. There's a lot of things going on, a lot of things in the pipeline that over the next few weeks will be announced that are going to change the way that the sport looks, in my opinion.
Wow, love it, man, dude! I can't wait for the full release of all the details, and I'm sneakily jealous of anyone who's going to be in the 3 Arena on that night in December, dude. I can't wait. Follow the man on Twitter and Instagram at Dan Hardy MMA. Of course, Full Reptile is the War Room, and you book Part Reptile. Always love chatting fights with you, Dan. Thank you so much, man.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for your time. I'll speak to you again soon.